Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I would like to start by welcoming you all. Thanks for being with us. The SFM project warmly welcomes you to its first virtual monthly seminar. We are really looking forward to having a great discussion with our outstanding guest speakers. My name is Bahadır Dinçer, and I am a research fellow at Bonn International Center for Conversion and an associate fellow at the SFM project at Central European University. Let me remind you that this is a public event and will be recorded and then posted on the project website afterwards. We are planning to be with you until 7 p.m. And after 20 minutes of each presentations from our guest speakers, we will have a discussion session. And of course, we are looking forward to receiving your questions through the Q&A function. Before we get started, before I introduce our guest speakers and proceed to the discussion, let me first give you a very brief information about the SFM project and why we decided to organize such virtual seminars with the participation of distinguished names. SFM project supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York and hosted at the Center for Religious Studies of Central European University has recently entered its second phase under the overall theme from disintegration to reconstitution of state and religion in the Middle East. The project in its second phase seeks to address the complex dynamics of relations between state, religion, and society in the rapidly changing context of the Middle East and under conditions of desegregation and violent conflict. So the dynamics of transition from active military engagement to conditions of unstable stalemate. So in addition to the expertise of its own fellows, the SFM project is keen to tap into other scholars' expertise from different disciplines with different or various research interests. So we believe that we need to benefit from different perspectives. That's why we decided to organize monthly seminars. Indeed, we used to have offline bi-weekly seminars during the first phase of the project between 2016 and 19. However, under the corona conditions, unfortunately, we cannot go with offline meetings. As I said, this is the first monthly seminar entitled A Post-Soviet Perspective on the Middle East. As you all know that Arab uprisings and the subsequent developments transported the Middle East region into a state of violence, conflict, and division. And it might be argued that the post-Soviet territories in the Balkans or in the Caucasus or in Central Asia have much in common with the Middle East, particularly the post-socialist Middle East, which includes, for instance, Iraq and Syria. And there might be comparable path-dependent developments arising in all. So it wouldn't be an exaggeration to claim that post-socialist and post-Soviet conditions are not confined just to territories where Soviet republics existed. So commonalities, similarities of conflict dynamics, and regional forms of wielding power and authority in the post-Soviet world and the Middle East regions might be observed from even a superficial consideration. So to achieve an accurate and comprehensive comparative knowledge on this assumption, one should not only get familiarized with the political and societal dynamics, for instance, in East Europe or in Caucasus, but also with the level of Soviet and Russian influence and the legacy of socialist order in the Middle East. So it's a twofold phenomenon. After the World War II, we all know that the Soviet Union emerged as a major presence in the Middle East affairs and securing partnership like with Egypt, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. So given its recent high-pitched military intervention in 2015 has changed the course of events and the dynamics of conflict in Syria, it's a must for us to focus on Russia and its approach to the region and its historical influence on the region. So with this seminar, with this first seminar, we will try to understand the evolution of post-1989 developments in the region from a post-Soviet perspective and consider Cold War era social and political structure in the Middle East in light of Soviet or socialist models and practices. Because meaningful comparisons between post-Soviet geography and the Middle East and consideration of specific patterns and conditions would provide initial millage, be followed by the critical question, might one be able to identify and describe a post-Soviet conditions? The speakers, the guest speakers will address a different aspect of these questions from their expertise in international relations, politics, and history, but mainly by focusing on the Russian approach to the Middle East. So let me introduce our guest speakers for this seminar. We have two distinguished guests, both from Germany, from Bonn, two leading experts on post-Soviet politics, post-Soviet geography, and their insights will help us explore the sense of the post-socialist condition. And I would like to express my sincere thanks on behalf of SFM to them for accepting our invitation. Our first speaker is Professor Andreas Heinemann-Gurder, one of the prominent names on post-Soviet politics, a professor of political science at Bonn University and a senior researcher at Bonn International Center for Conversion, a research institute focusing on conflict studies. Professor Heinemann-Gurder studied history, political science, and German literature at the Freie University or Free University of Berlin, and then joined a postgraduate program at Lomonosov University in Moscow. Earned his PhD from Freie University of Berlin, and when we will get the past teaching assignments, we can see, in addition to the Freie University and Humboldt University of Berlin, Duke University, University of Pennsylvania, University of Cologne, and of course the University of Bonn. His research interest revolves around post-Soviet politics, authoritarianism, civil-military relations, and irregular armed groups wherever they are across the globe. So, and also currently, he is leading a research project on de facto regimes in the post-Soviet geography. Then we will be listening to Associate Professor Zaur Gasimov, Professor of History at the Russian History Department at Bonn University. He studied international relations, international law, and history at the universities in Azerbaijan and Germany. Earned his PhD in Russian history and joined the Leibniz Institute of European History in Mainz in Germany. Between 2013 and 19, he was in Turkey, was a research fellow at the Orient Institute, Istanbul, and in the next 2 years worked as a part of a Max Weber Foundation project. And then now within the framework of a DVFG position, he will work for the next couple of years on knowledge transfer and transnational circulation of ideas between Eastern or Central Europe and the Republic of Turkey. And his research interests are history of Poland, Russian-Turkish relations, Russian-Iranian relations, and history of the Caucasus and the Russian-Arab relations, of course. Then, after the presentations, the core director of the SFM project, Professor Aziz Azme, will be discussing of the seminar. He is currently University Professor Emeritus in the Department of History at the Central European University. He received his PhD in Oriental Studies from the University of Oxford and has been visiting professor at Yale University, Columbia, the University of California, Berkeley, and Georgetown University, among many others. And his research interests are comparative empires, history of political thought, intellectual history, and Ottoman Middle Eastern studies. So I would like to give the first floor to Andreas. He will be sharing his thoughts on the Russian approach to the Middle East. He will compare the Soviet and the contemporary Russian policy in the region. So the floor is yours, Andreas. You have 20 minutes. And yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I have prepared a PowerPoint. Is the PowerPoint visible, or can we, I tried now to share. Okay, let's do it that way. So, I wrote my PhD or finished it already 32 years ago. I'm already a man of age about Soviet policy in the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I have dealt afterwards with many different topics, but on and off, I have returned to the question whether there are certain continuities of contemporary Russian policy compared to what the Soviets did in this whole area. And so I will try to attack this problem or address this problem from different angles. What are the sources of the Russian conduct there? And often Russian policy is seen as an enigma. So there's a lot of guesswork and the closure of the Russian decision-making process. So its transparency invites, of course, many speculations about what are the ultimate motives, and many talk about geopolitical drivers. I tried then to apply first, or try now to apply the standard approaches to the understanding of foreign policy of any given countries, and then we could see whether this makes sense for the Russian case in the Middle East. So the neorealist would say the Russians are simply interested in stability, and either in balancing the United States or the other Western powers, or in bandwagoning, let's say, partially also with China. Some say, you know, the Russians have offensive interests, and the others claim they have only defensive interests. So basically, it's about containment of Western influence. So that's the usual neorealist and predominant explanation. The second says, you know, the Russians are using opportunities. So it's about their cost-benefit calculus, about gain maximization. It's about zero-sum games. It's basically exploiting any kind of weakness of the West, and thinking that what's a loss for the West or any competitor is a win for the Russians. So no a highly opportunistic behavior, far less than a strategic behavior. Constructivism would say, yes, the Russians have a certain self-image about themselves, and so their relationship to the Middle East has to do with the role of the Tsarist Empire, with you know, the role the Soviets also played in the Middle East. So it's rather about their self-image that they try to project, and maybe they have a certain idea about themselves that is imperial and as a superpower, as a great power, and therefore they want to project this to the outside world. So, but the key to understanding what the Russians are doing is to look at the discourses and how they develop certain norms and values about their behavior. The fourth approach could be institutionalism, and you could say, okay, the Russians are not egoistic, they are not, you know, only selfish, they act in common with other partners, and so, like, let's say, European Union member states or NATO member states, the Russians are also, you know, channeled in their behavior by institutions. But then you would have to ask what kind of institutions actually channel Russian behavior. We could talk about the Shanghai Organization. We could talk about the, you know, limited military alliance that exists in the former Soviet Union, the Eurasian Union, but there is no common institution with any Middle Eastern country. Then we could say, okay, it's a primacy of domestic politics. So maybe they are mostly concerned about, you know, the spread of Islamic fundamentalism. It's about, you know, the interests of the oil oligarchs. It's maybe about, you know, preserving authoritarian regimes, and therefore they side with those that are under threat of colored revolutions. And so it's basically the incentive is a domestic one, and the Russians engage wherever they think it's a contribution to their own regime survival. The fifth approach would say, let's look how decisions are made in Russia. This, of course, as I already said, highly secretive, and there are very, very few people actually participating in this decision-making. And so when we want to look at this decision-making approach, then we have to face very, very limited sources to test the case. But what could be said is that those people involved in decision-making are there are far fewer than in Soviet times. So there was more collective decision-making and collective weighing of options than nowadays under Putin. Finally, the biographical approach, you could say you understand Putin and then you understand Russian foreign policy. Big men make big politics. Okay, what are the overarching interests of Russia? They want to preserve their status, which they perceive that they have lost it after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. No Western interference, but not just in Russian affairs, also in the Eurasian space. They see themselves as a hegemonic power in the Eurasian space. We do not know to what extent the Middle East pertains and also to the Eurasian space. They are interested in authoritarian regime survival. They also more and more talk about a clash of civilizations with the West. so that they belong to different normative and value orders. They want to protect Russians abroad. They prefer, instead of unipolarity, a multipolar world. They always talk about also Russia being a bulwark against Islamic fundamentalism. So they said the war on terror we conducted first in Chechnya. Then I also want to prevent or avoid a repetition of the traumatic experience in the 1990s after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. They want to retain the balance of power. No NATO expansion, especially in the post-Soviet realm. They have a shared interest with the United States and no spread of weapons of mass destruction. So therefore, a commonality with the EU and the United States vis-a-vis Iran, but also North Korea. They want to open the Western markets to Russian investors, particularly in the energy sector. And one could also say, you know, what are the geographic priorities? It's first of all the Eurasian Union, so the area of the former Soviet Union, the Asia-Pacific region, mainly China, but Vietnam, Cambodia, Japan too, and then Europe, and then the Middle East. So I wouldn't say that the Middle East is geographically a top priority for contemporary Russian foreign policy. Where do I see continuities to the Soviet case? So the great power status, you know, the status seeking, the fixation also on the United States, the NATO as an enemy, that's continuity, the fear of Western interference, also that the Middle East is compared, let's say, to Latin America or Far East Asia is really declared as a sphere of interest. So they have no interest in Sub-Saharan Africa or very limited. They want to have military bases in the near abroad and also in the Middle East. We could see also a certain dominance in decision-making from Soviet times to contemporary Russia in the role of the security sector, and maybe it even became stronger, the influence of the security establishment, because in Soviet times it was under subordinated to the Communist Party, and now they are ruling without a party above them. Then I also would say the Soviet Union claimed a special civilizational status, and the Russians are doing that now too, as if they are the third Rome, or representing the legacy of non-Western civilizations. So at times they are even referring to Genghis Khan as the first anti-Western warrior that preserved Russia against alien Western influences. The practice of limited sovereignty, so claiming the right to interfere in neighboring states, also the attempt to form military alliances, there is also continuity. Also the military interventionism, although one could say that the Russians are more likely now to intervene even beyond the confines of the former socialist camp. So in the past, the Soviets intervened in countries they deemed socialist, whereas Russia now, with the help of paramilitaries, with the Air Force, also intervenes directly in the Middle East. So in Soviet times, the Russians never wanted to have a direct military confrontation with the United States, or let's say with the Brits or the France in Egypt, as long as they controlled the Suez Channel. What are differences? They don't export anymore their own regime. They have no global outreach. So Russia is no longer interested in really global presence. They cooperate with very, very diverse partners. So with Saudi Arabia, Israel, Iran, Turkey, Syria at the same time. So parties that are opposed to each other are nonetheless partners of Russia. So they are not as choosy as the Soviets, who allied with those that were politically close to them. As I said already, direct military intervention is a novelty. Also, the use of irregular armed groups, of hybrid warfare, is a novelty. Then also this very tiny group of decision makers, and that there is no longer any ideological mission. So, and I would say also the Soviets were more strategic in their approach to the Middle East than the contemporary Russia, which is very short-term in their approach. They use opportunities, but when you ask them, what is your ultimate goal in Syria, they can't answer. I would maybe, because I've already here basically consumed my time, I would say among the factors that inform what the Russians are currently doing is that they exploit the unhappiness with the United States, with France and the United Kingdom, especially in Arab countries. They are fearful also of the rise of radical Sunni forces in a couple of Middle Eastern countries. They are interested in higher oil and gas prices together with OPEC. They are interested in an alliance building with Iran. They want to have more military bases, as many as possible. They see also the Middle East as a test ground for the weapons, as a show for their arms exports. They want to disrupt also NATO through Turkey. As I already said, they seek good relations with almost everybody. Even those who are opposed to each other. So they want to sell weapons to Iran and to the Saudis at the same time. They cooperate with Syria, but also with Erdogan and so on. So far less, let's say, principled in their alliance behavior than compared to the Soviets. That much from my side. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for the overview of Soviet and contemporary Russian policy towards Middle East. As far as I understand from your remarks, there's sort of a continuity in Russia's approach to the region to a large extent. There are a lot of similarities between what drove Soviet foreign policy and what drives Russian policy. The main difference, I think, what I understood from your points, I have the impression that yes, Moscow abandoned the communist ideology or ideological mission, but it still pushes an ideology of Russian greatness. So still we have sort of an ideology. I think this is an important difference. And over the last decade, Russia has returned to the Middle East, and some of its objectives remain same as they were during the Soviet Union. So Russia remains eager to prove itself as a great power. So great power politics play an important role still in its approach to Middle East. And also there is a lot of opportunism in the current Russian policy, foreign policy, as far as I understand. The geopolitical realignment and instability that caused by the civil war in Libya and Syria and the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, they all have created window of opportunities for Russia to rebuild some of the old relationships and to build new ones. So now let's move on with Zaur, Dr. Gasimov. He will be providing an account of Russian interest in and the influence on the Middle East, dating without interruption to the 19th century. Yes, the floor is yours, Zaur. It's our pleasure to have you with us. I mean, although you are a bit sick. And so you have also 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. So I would maybe start with tackling with the question why Russia is efficient in the region of the Middle East. But before we start maybe with this question, we should look at some aspects which are very distinct for Russia there and which make it very different. The Russian Federation today and the entire post-Soviet world and the region of the Middle East, they have somehow overlapping geographies. They are neighbors, this aspect, and they were for centuries neighbors. The Soviet Union had border with the Republic of Turkey, quite long one, with Iran, with Afghanistan. Neither France nor UK had it, but the Soviet Union had it. And talking about the overlapping geography, it's an important issue if you look at the region of the Middle East, so somewhere in the 70s or in 80s, you would have huge communities of Azeris and Armenians living both in the Soviet Union, in the Soviet Caucasia, and in the region of the Middle East. The same goes for the communities of Uzbeks and Tajiks who lived in Soviet Asia and in Afghanistan. These communities were in strenuous exchange with each other that could be somehow controlled by the Soviet Union, but at least it was an important asset. So we are dealing here with two neighboring regions, very interwoven with each other. The same goes for the confessional map. If you look at the Shia world, so its borders were not corresponding with the Soviet-Iranian border at all, and the same goes also for the Sunni Islam. The second aspect, which is of huge importance, if we today hear this notion of bizim coğrafya, our geography, in the Turkish context, many parts of the post-Soviet world are also understood within of this notion. The same goes also for the Persian notion of Mantegeya Ma. So our region, these concepts of our regionness, they are very interwoven in at least in Turkish, Persian, and in Russian context. Some years ago, the former Russian Soviet ambassador to Cairo and to Tehran, Vladimir Vinogradov, published his book that was titled Nash Blizhny Vostok, Our Middle East. So now I would try to tackle how the Middle East could become his, or at least Russian, or what he meant with that, by saying that. He meant the decades of the cultural exchange process between the world of the Middle East and Russia. Russian schools in Nazareth and in Palestine, the role of the Russian Imperial Palestine Society at the turn of the century, which gave scholarships mostly for the Christian Arabs to study theology in Russian cities. The same goes also for hundreds, if not thousands. Maybe one could talk about thousands of Arab students educated at the Soviet high schools and universities in many different fields during the Soviet time. And many of them, majority of them, went back to the region of the Middle East and did big names in the field of arts and technology and so on. But not only, the names like Hosni Mubarak or Khalifa Haftar, Mustafa Barzani, Mahmoud Abbas, they mirror the very strong and close interaction between the Soviet educational world and the Middle East. About the special relation towards Israel, we have already heard. It's a very specific feature of Russia that almost 1 million of population in present-day Israel are Russian speakers. It's a very, very unique development. The same, also an interesting aspect is if we look at the development of the Arab theater, even in one of the local centers of the Arab culture, like Cairo, but also in Beirut, which was more under Francophone influence or Western influence. In Syria, and also in Baghdad. In these fields, the development of theaters, arts, ballet studios was strongly influenced by the Soviet Union since the 50s and 60s. Even in Turkey, which belonged to the first NATO countries in the region, so to say, even there, the name of Muhsin Ertuğrul mirrors the close interaction with the Soviet tradition. I would touch another aspect. Very often the representatives of the Caucasian republics in the Soviet Union or of Central Asian republics, they played a role in the Russian or Moscow-based politics and the region of the Middle East. For instance, the Soviet Azeri ballet dancer, female ballet dancer, Gamar Almazadeh, was sent to Baghdad in 1970 and stayed there until 72 and built up the local dance theater. And the point was that the Iraqi representatives were eager to get somebody from Soviet Muslim republics. They thought that these specialists would understand the local mentality better than somebody coming from Kiev or from Moscow. And she really transferred the know-how and organized this theater in the city of Baghdad. And there is a huge number of examples like that, showing that the interaction was very strong, how somehow neglected in the international scholarship. And I would like to add also another aspect, which is of paramount importance. After the Second World War, in the Soviet Union, the Arabic language and the Persian language started to be taught as foreign languages in the school curriculum, like French, German, and English. And so it's now that we talk about similar developments, maybe in Germany and in France, thinking about the importance of the diversification of foreign languages offer for school children at school. But the schools with Persian and Arabic were established in 50s and 60s, mostly in the countries of the Caucasus and Central Asia. But that boosted the Oriental studies, of course, in the Soviet Union, because one needed also teachers of Oriental languages who could teach the language to the children. And now I come maybe to the most amazing world of the Soviet Orientology. Many volumes of international scholarship were already devoted to this topic. By the way, if you would ask somebody in Moscow, also politicians, why Russia is maybe efficient or successful in the Middle East, the answer you hear more often is because of Russian Vostokovedenia, because of Russian Orientology. And about 10 years ago, there was a huge debate in Russia about the reform of Oriental studies. There were voices saying that this discipline should be reformed and partitioned, divided into area studies and political science. And there were also protest voices. And finally, it was not done. But if you look, who was organized to protest against that? It was the director of the Hermitage, one of Russia's and world's leading museums, who is Arabist himself. And they were the press spokesman of Putin, Dmitry Peskov, he is Turkologist, and so on, so on. So the list is very long. here. So you see that the social position, the authority of Orientologists in the Russian society is a different one. So the reasons for that are rooted somehow in the Soviet reality, because the career in the Oriental studies opened new vistas in many other fields, also in the field of secret services, but also within of the party structures and so on, that gave you an opportunity to work abroad, and that meant also a better salary. But still another byproduct of all these developments was that the work position of an Orientalist or Orientologist and of a discipline of Oriental studies is a very esteemed one in Russia. And the another aspect is I would like to touch, looking at the time. Do I have time still, Father?
Yes, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah. Another aspect, maybe if you look at the time now, I see how all these aspects of this legacy of the Soviet period, how important they became, because the Orientalists who were engaged at the academies of sciences or at the research institutes, they are commentators of the current developments at the Russian television, but also they have a very close context to the politics, and also were engaged as envoys, special envoys for the political tasks, like the prominent Russian Arabist Naumkin. Another aspect with the aspect of the Arab students at the Russian universities in many Arab countries, in Jordan, in Beirut. The case of Beirut is very interesting here, because as under French influence than on Russian one, but even in Beirut, you would find a very vivid, very active association of graduates from Russian universities and high schools, and a Russian embassy and Russian consulates. They cooperate now very intensively with all these associations and initiatives. And what helps, of course, the linguistic competence of the Russian ambassadors across the Middle East is of paramount importance. I would maybe make a point at this aspect, and we could maybe discuss more later during the question and answer part.
Thank you, Zoran. Thank you very much for sharing your very, very important and interesting points with us. Actually, thank you for clearly and concisely summarizing the entire long history of Russian influence in the Middle East in a short period of time. Thanks a lot. You have drawn the general picture of the main milestones in the cultural and intellectual interaction between Russia, be it Soviet or post-Soviet, and the Middle East. I would like to draw the attention to another point. I mean, we all agree that Russia's military intervention in Syria was an important moment for Moscow in 2015, and it marked by many observers as Russia's return to the region after it was mostly absent in the previous 2 decades. But what I understood from your approach is the fact that Russia has been in the region for a long time as an important player, was never absent, at least culturally. So the level of presence, of course, was much lower than before, but we cannot say it was not there. So it was, of course, a departure from the norm, but not absent, we would rather say. And what I found most interesting is the point you made about the Soviet-oriented studies, but I mean, I would ask you to elaborate on it, but I think we should devote a separate seminar on this. I mean, I think it's a very interesting point. So thank you very much for your remarks. Now, after these two presentations, I really wonder how you would react to the points made by the panelists, Aziz. I mean, you are the author of several publications on the Middle East, and of course, you're an important observer of the political developments and the close witness of the changes in the political thought of the Arab world over the last couple of decades. I mean, you are one of the important names who has an impact in the construction of contemporary Arab intellectual thought. So, and besides, your last co-edited book is about to be released by Saki Books, in which several contributors provide different aspects of the changing dynamics in the Middle East over the last 3 decades, namely since the early 1990s. So I kindly ask you to share your thoughts with us, please. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much, Professor Heinemann and Dr. Gasimov. This is all extremely interesting. I'm very pleased to have received such accounts that, in fact, bring out primarily the complexity of Russian engagement in the Middle East region, not only in the very, very recent past, but also in the course of the Cold War and even before. The idea of continuous geopolitical regions, as it were, in the minds of Russian politicians and policymakers, I think, is a very, very interesting one. And I would like to emphasize also something which came out towards the end now, namely the idea of a Soviet cultural commonwealth. A Soviet cultural commonwealth which consists not only of the tens of thousands of graduates in the Arab world and beyond of Soviet universities, and not only of Russian Soviet universities, but also of universities in Eastern Europe, in Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and so on. The Russian language sphere as a main component in what I would like to call the Soviet cultural commonwealth, and that, of course, did not extend very far within the Arab world, but it did have certain islands. But of course, it extended across the Soviet Union. After 1989, some parts of it continuing their comfort with the use of the Russian language, and others, such as, for instance, Georgia, reacting fairly violently against the use of the language. The dissemination of Marxism, which I would wager to say, without any reservations, was the central feature of Arab culture in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And of course, the influence of and the presence of Russian literature and the Russian cinema. Beirut was mentioned. There was a very active Russian cultural center, which showed Russian films, which promoted Russian literature, which disseminated translations, incidentally excellent translations, into Arabic of main works of Russian and Soviet literature as well, and so on. But what I'd like to emphasize, I have very little time, what I'd like to talk about now is not so much continuities as breaks. Now, if we are to think of a number of countries in the Arab world, primarily Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Algeria, Libya to a lesser extent, as having had political systems aligned to Soviet norms, broadly understood, a particular type of internal organization with a leading political party, and central direction of the economy with 5-year plans, and quite a number of things which necessarily emerge from these. You would compare them, of course, not only to some Soviet republics, but they would be comparable also to other parts of the world where similar things happened after 1989. Mozambique, Angola, Vietnam, to name only three, somewhat distant from the Middle East, but sharing quite a number of features in the way in which internal polities were constructed and certain alliances on the internationally. Now, 1989, in my view, was the point of a very radical break, a very radical one, a very rapid one, which doesn't mean that previous alliances and ideas and friendships have died away, but they have become less central and indeed in many respects very marginal to things that have changed. Now, number one, the first element is actually savage late capitalism. That is to say, the institution of neoliberal economic policies very suddenly. Incidentally, before 1989, there's one place in the Arab world which did this, namely Egypt, under Sadat, when he was trying to undo the legacy of Abdel Nasser, right? So we have the introduction of new economic norms facilitated by the continuation of authoritarian state structures, which were gradually shedding very important elements in their ideological baggage and promoting a polity or ideological modules, as it were, which were primarily nativist. If one looked at the ex-Soviet republics, one would find it perhaps very pronounced in a place, more pronounced than others in a place like Turkmenistan, perhaps less pronounced in Uzbekistan, which has a very much larger Russian proportion of the population, and with the continuing use of the Russian language, and so on. So, very soon after this initial shock came a stage which has been really very well theorized in literature on Eastern Europe, namely state capture. That is to say, the capture of state goods and common goods, including natural resources, industries, the supply of energy, and so on, by private interests through the agency of the state and of state authority and state capacity to legislate. Now, this is precisely, it is these characteristics which I would personally designate as post-Soviet, as characteristically post-Soviet. And they have actually occurred across the board in a variety of different ways, to different extents given each particular country, but overall, these actually did characterize the post-Soviet stage. Nativism is a very important element, even when nativism may look very strange. For a Soviet republic, for instance, if one were to look at Chechnya, how is nativism displayed? Nativism is displayed by the president of the Chechen Republic wrestling in public, riding on horses, and promoting certain forms of what I call barbarian manhood, right? Of barbarian manhood as a kind of as a component in state ideology. Complementing all this is, of course, and that is an international phenomenon after 1989, is a trend which complements all of these and settles accounts with a previous ideological consciousness, namely the very systematic attack against the idea of progress. Not only to undo the wager on progress in Marxism, but also to undo all manner of social changes that had occurred either in the Soviet republics and in countries like Syria and Iraq, which were very closely allied to the Soviet Union. We all remember probably the use of the term a surrogate proletariat used by the Soviet authorities in the 1920s with reference to women in the Central Asian Republic. That these women needed to be liberated from the clutches of their clans, of their religion, in order actually to make a strategic break in the social structures and facilitate the emergence of a new form of the social order. These are actually the main points that I wish to make, since I had so little time, but I think I've made them in a form which would allow responses or discussions if such were to be required. Now, Professor Heinemann said that that there's a lot of guesswork in assessing Soviet foreign policy and Russian foreign policy. And I would like to use this as a leitmotif to hazard a guess that I've had for many years, from the very beginning of the Russian intervention in the Syrian civil war, namely that a dream solution for Putin would have been to recast Assad, the president of Syria, after the image of Kadyrov. Matters were much too complicated for this. But I think that this in itself, if it were to be true, would then give us a certain clue or a key to the ideological posture of the present Russian establishment towards countries which are in a certain way allied, but also according to certain perspectives backward, and therefore need to be saved by a certain authoritarian form of rule, which is a little bit folkloristic, as it were, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aziz, for this very insightful reaction. What I understood from your reaction is the fact that when comparing post-Soviet geography with mainly Iraq and Syria, we should also think to our material or our findings in terms of post-socialist order as well. I mean, the territories in post-Soviet geography have much in common with the political entities like Syria and Iraq and the fragments emerging from them. And your remarks also reminded me that the overthrow of the Iraqi monarchy in the revolution of 1958 marked the end of the Baghdad Pact, designed to contain the Soviet Union and pave the way for a new phase of nation and identity building in Iraq. And the same thing can be said for the Ba'ath coup and the subsequent developments in Syria as well in 16 and 70s. So I understand that it's a valid point to argue that to a certain extent, in spite of the differences, what we have in the Middle East and in the post-Soviet geography all arise from, to some extent, somehow, from post-socialist and post-Soviet conditions. So then I understand that it's really important to identify or describe what we mean by post-socialist and post-Soviet conditions. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to open the floor for discussion and for questions and comments. You can address your questions and comments to the panelists through using the Q&A function, or you can also raise your blue hand and then ask the questions in person as well. Like I think I have the right to allow you to speak. I have a function here, so I can use that. But if you excuse me, while you are formulating your questions to the panelists, I would like to ask the first brief question to our panelists as a follow-up from where Aziz has already left. My question is for both of you, Andreas and Zaur. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there emerged 15 new states. And actually, if you add the de facto structures, this number exceeds 20. So we are talking about, I mean, we have more than 20 political entities newly emerged after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And all these political entities and their people had lived under the socialist or authoritarian political structures for decades. And then accordingly, we start to call them post-Soviet or post-socialist after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So what do we refer to, or what do we mean with the term post-Soviet or post-socialist? I really wonder what you think on the very subject as leading experts on post-Soviet geography. I mean, I am aware of the fact that there's a huge amount of literature on this, but when you look at norms of governance, regime typologies, institutional arrangements, or the dynamics of conflict, the structure of civil society, reflexes of the elite or the people, if you're asked to briefly define or describe the main pillars and characteristics of being post-Soviet, how would you define the term? Do we have a unified standard definition or term? Because we are talking about different countries. I mean, countries in Central Asia or countries in Caucasus or East Europe, they are all different from one another. So how would you respond to such a question? Do you think we have a universal and standard definition? Thank you.
I mean, there is something in common these former Soviet republics have, and then in many respects they are highly heterogeneous. I would say there's still the legacy of the Homo Sovieticus, so of certain behavioral traits people were socialized in politically, but also in terms of social norms after socialism. Then we have Russian as lingua franca among the people of the post-Soviet world. I think we still have the colonial legacy. So Russia was a continental empire, and there was never a proper decolonization process. We have, basic nation and state building processes going on in the former Soviet Union. And with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, we could say a colonial power finally collapsed, but Russia never gave up its colonial and imperial self-understanding. So Russia is still undergoing, as many other colonial powers, a process of turning its imperial self-understanding into a nation state. And I don't know whether it ever will end up as a normal nation state or will always somehow retain in its self-understanding an imperial code of conduct. I would also say that the economic ties, they are still there among the post-Soviet countries, especially also in this Eurasian Union, although one could say there is a huge competition now over this whole post-Soviet sphere. So most of these countries, feel themselves as they are part of a great game. So the Chinese, the Russians, partially also the European Union, Turkey, Iran are somehow, and at times also the United States are competing over this area. So they are, somewhat trying on the one hand to balance their behavior, not to depend on one hegemonic power alone. I think what's also part of the post-Soviet condition is the disillusionment about post-Soviet regime change. So is this already a democracy, or is it even getting worse? There is a kind of delegitimization due to the post-Soviet experience about democracy, and therefore an authoritarian regression, or at least also a disillusionment about what the European Union and the United States have to offer. So we see an authoritarian backlash in most of these countries. Most of them are authoritarian, but some of them are deficient democracies, but none of them is a consolidated democracy compared to certain Middle Eastern European countries, where we also have to admit that some countries were seen for a while as consolidated and turned into illiberal democracy. So these are things that come to mind. I think also the role of religion increased after post-Soviet times. So the Soviet Union was a secular state, and the role of religion in politics increased throughout the whole region for regime legitimization, but also for social cohesion.
Thank you. Zaur, would you like to say something?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I would say that what is also maybe common for all these 15 post-Soviet states, particularly for those in the Caucasus and in Central Asia, is certain secularism, and even in the case of the countries with a predominantly Muslim population, even a belligerent secularism. So particularly in Central Asia and in Azerbaijan. somehow that sometimes disturbs the relationships with the region of the Middle East, and vice versa. That was the case in the Uzbekistan and Iran relations during the 90s, particularly. On another issue is that the continuity was before 91 and after 91, that the societies had their own mental map on the Middle East. In Armenia, the notion of Burj Hamid and the Armenian quarters of Aleppo or of Damascus, they were very well known. The course of Western Armenian language was taught at schools, and the local newspapers reported about the life of the Armenian community across the region. The same goes also for the Soviet and post-Soviet Azerbaijan. 1991, nothing changed dramatically. Najaf belonged to the mental map of an average Azeri before 91, and it is a case of after 91. And the same also goes for Central Asia. It was, I guess, a couple of years ago when the new president of Uzbekistan, Mirziyoyev, decided to consider Afghanistan as a part of Central Asia. And so you see there are some new dynamics and some farewell of the Soviet practices, which differentiated the Central Asia, the true Central Asia, and Afghanistan. So now that became somehow more integrationist with some regard. What is important here, indeed, 15 republics you have mentioned, Osman, but they were all very different. They are all very different, and they change differently. But some of them, particularly those in the Caucasus and in Central Asia, they changed really radically. You should imagine that republics like Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, the population tripled. They have the majority of the population in present-day Uzbekistan have no own experience or memory of the Soviet past. The same goes also for the level of the competence in Russian language. And in case of Azerbaijan, maybe it's half of population. So we deal here with very young populations, and so that makes maybe also the interaction bit more interesting. Another issue is also the engagement of those geographies in the Middle East. The hundreds, even not thousands, of warriors from the Russian Northern Caucasus went to Syria and combated there. The same goes for Azerbaijan, where both Sunni Azeris and Shia Azeris went to the Syrian war. And the same goes also for Central Asia. That means that nowadays we have a new dimension of the interaction between those sub-regions of this post-Soviet world and the region of the Middle East. And this kind of interaction was not the case before 91. So
yeah, Andreas, you have something that's right, I think.
I very much appreciate the remarks by Assis, and I would somehow support the view that we should not overestimate the continuities and the commonalities. So what is actually the social capital that Russia still has in the Middle East? And Zaur has highlighted all these traits from the Soviet Union, from the Soviet legacy, but I would say certain things nonetheless disappeared after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So I have been teaching at the University of Tunis a couple of times over the last 10 years, students from different Arabic countries. And one of the courses I had to teach there was about Soviet foreign policy and also in the Middle East. And so I always asked the students first, which came from Egypt, Syria, from Algeria, Morocco, and so on, different Arab countries, what is your image of Russia? And so the one was, of course, related to Putin, the strongman, but the next was the usual Russian image: crime, prostitutes, and alcohol. So the public image of the Russian is very much shaped, by these stereotypes. So it's all in all not positive. Afghanistan has also left an imprint, because that was by the Arab world and by the Muslim world seen as an attack also as a Muslim country. The two wars against Chechnya somehow undermined also the positive image the Soviet Union may have had, or Russia may have had, in the Middle East. The fighters from the North Caucasus who participate in Syria, but who participated also in Afghanistan, we don't know to what extent they were sent to other hotspots too. They are treated by the Russian government as terrorists. So we have always to discern between where does the Russians or the Russian government, the Russian state, have a positive image, and that might be quite heterogeneous. So maybe on anti-Western, anti-liberal grounds, there is some commonality, but Russia is no role model at all as a regime, in difference to Soviet times, where it could at least partially be emulated. So I would not overestimate, the soft power of Russia in the Middle East.
Okay, I think Aziz would like to add something, right? Could you please unmute yourself?
Thank you for the reminder. Yes, indeed. Well, with respect to the Homo Sovieticus, yes, Homo Sovieticus, a certain habitus of behavior, a certain cultural habitus, often a certain body of reading. I appreciated what has just been said by Andreas about the reputation of the Russians. This actually is rather a new one. The solidarity sense of solidarity with the Afghans or with the Chechens was actually, until quite recently, given the new way in which Russia is being portrayed and is projecting itself, was actually confined to Islamists. It was not an Arab phenomenon. It was confined to Islamists. And these were particular kinds of Islamists who emerged from a particular kind of Islam, which was sustained by Saudi Arabia and still at that time marginal in the Arab world, in a way in which it is no longer marginal. So that particular issue of Islamic internationalism really had very little traction. It has more traction now. It has more traction now because the Islamic currents have become strengthened. Not necessarily the jihadist currents, but the pan-Islamic currents as well. There is no doubt about that. And there is, of course, quite a lot of kicking Russia when it's down on the floor after the event. There is quite a lot of that. Again, it started with certain Islamic forces, and now because of the intervention in Syria, because of quite a number of things, has lost a lot of, the country has lost a lot of soft power. However, of course, Syria is split. The country is split. There's no way of making any estimates in terms of percentages or of figures, but the country is split. There is a strong pro-Russian faction or body of opinion, and it's not confined to the Orthodox Syrians. It is not confined to the Orthodox Syrians, right? Russia had always been the protector of orthodoxy in Syria and Palestine, right, from the 19th century onwards, and that has continued. And there's a very, very strong pro-Russian feeling among the Orthodox of Damascus or Aleppo or elsewhere, but it is not confined to this. So I think it's really necessary to nuance the picture.
Thank you. We have other questions, but I think, Zohar, you would like to add something, right?
I was also very astonished hearing about the position of the Tunisian student, because during 6 years working in Istanbul, I have done a completely opposite experience. And even during the crisis in Russian-Turkish relations, the image of Russia, of Russian culture, was very, very positive. And I had the feeling that, and I talked also with Turkish Russianists, the Russian literature is booming since several decades. One can't find a bookshop without shelves of Russian literature. There are even, meanwhile, 7-8 different translations of one work. For instance, you can find like 5-6 different Turkish texts of one Chekhov's piece. And I met so often very young students or young men and women reading Gorky, just sitting on the ferry boat, crossing from the Asian part of Istanbul to the European part. I cannot imagine to see anyone in Baku, in Kiev, or even in Germany reading this Gorky's piece. But it was the case in Turkey. And in Iran, the same. The Russian literature is booming, and the interest for the for Russian cultural production is very huge. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me address some of the questions from the participants. We talked about the export of Soviet models, economic, cultural, political, to states beyond the Soviet bloc. Syria is an example. I would like to ask about the export of Soviet models of surveillance and policing to states beyond the Soviet bloc. What does the comparative experience tell us about those, specifically in states that were not part of the Soviet bloc but were under Soviet patronage? It seems cases diverge in this regard. What is the post-Soviet experience with regards to policing and surveillance in areas beyond the Soviet bloc? Yes, we have a question. Who would like to go first, or Andreas?
And good question, worth to be studied, I would say. I'm not at a position really to answer that. I mean, we have seen here these irregular armed groups, which are now exported also for training purposes to all kinds of countries. So the Wagner group, but not just Wagner alone, are, private military companies as an instrument of Russian foreign policy, and they are sent for training purposes to the Central African Republic, to Libya, to Mozambique. So they at least participate in this market of private security firms that are out there. And in the past, this market was dominated by the United States, by Britain, and by South Africa. But Russia plays now an active role. In terms of technology, I would say China is much more important in terms of selling surveillance technology, using artificial intelligence, face recognition software. The Russians are bad when it comes to the hardware. They have quite good software developers, and I was told the other day, so basically last week, that the Russians are making advances in face recognition software. So countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, North Korea, of course, they are all interested in buying respective technologies. Whether they go out there and sell what the Russian Secret Service is doing, I mean, what I know is that the Russians are using both the FSB and the GRU, the military intelligence, for running the de facto regimes in the post-Soviet space. So they play a key role in training and selecting personnel in the de facto regimes when it comes to the security sector and so on, and providing arms. And also ensuring that the security services in de facto regimes are loyal to Moscow. But I haven't seen it yet beyond. I mean, there are few studies on what Wagner does, for example, in Libya or in Mozambique and in Congo. And those who investigated were killed. I mean, 3 journalists financed by Khodorkovsky who tried to trace what Wagner is doing, they were all 3 killed in Central African Republic. So it's dangerous to do this kind of field research.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. You want to respond, or we have more questions for you as well?
We can jump to another questions.
Okay, then Aziz, you want to say something about the question related to
just very briefly? Yes, I mean the Wagner and so forth, and the various organizations of private security or semi-private security. That's all over the place. I simply wanted to remind everyone that in Soviet times, the main agency which trained Syrian, Iraqi, and Egyptian security services was East German, right? Quite often coordinated by the Russians. It was particularly thick connection at the time of Andropov, but it was really basically the East Germans who did this.
Yeah. Thank you. So we are running out of time, so let me address another question to Dr. Gasimov. You talk about many students from the Middle East studying at Russian Soviet universities. Could you please tell us about how these translate in actual language on the ground in terms of politics or economy? And another question from the same person to Andreas. To what extent do you think that the rise of the influence of Russia in the Middle East after the Arab Spring is linked to the US lack of interest in the region? Do you think that Russia will fill the vacuum made by US gradual retreat from the region, especially if we reach to a stage where there is a less dependence on fossil fuel? And also there is another related question from another person. Russia is no longer the only Western major power in the Middle East. There is an increasing China presence in the region. Will these influences be complementary and cooperating one or separate endeavors that actually compete? So yes, I can summarize some of the questions in 2. Yeah. Please.
Maybe with regard to the student question, we should start at the very dawn with the QTV. That was a communist university of toilets of the East that was established in 1921 in Moscow, but with several campuses. And the idea was to prepare the cadres for the Middle East, and a number of very prominent people from from Turkey and Iran got education there. So they studied not only Marxism and Leninism, but also know how to conduct revolution and so on, undercover activities and other stuff. This university was closed during the high peak of Stalinism in 38, and the re-invitation of the Middle Eastern communists to study in the Soviet Union started after the end of the World War II, and there were mostly the members of the communist parties. There were two lists. They could get the scholarship from the Soviet government, or they had to get the scholarship from their own communist party. And Moscow was also very interested in not to get only the representatives of the ethnic minorities, because the experience of Kutave was that the Christians dominated among the students coming from the Arab countries. However, the situation in the society was a bit different. So that's why the situation changed a bit in the 50s and 60s. Of course, you hadn't many students from Iran and Turkey to other important countries in the region, because both countries were pro-Western in Iran's case until the Islamic Revolution. But even after that, nothing changed dramatically with this regard. If we look at the situation now, so with regard of the numbers, it's like 20,000 in the 80s, 25,000 if I get it now correctly, from the Arab countries studied in the Soviet Union. But if we look at the situation nowadays, I can mention the huge project Russia backs in Turkey, that's the education of the students in field of nuclear physics, in order to be engaged afterwards in Akkuyu, in the plant of Akkuyu. And that is the scholarship for several years. It's a long-term project. So the Turkish students get an opportunity to study Russian language 1 year, and then they go to the University of, I guess, of Novosibirsk, and they have to complete their 6 years of study of physics, nuclear physics, and then they go back to Turkey and get a job at the Akkuyu plant. And for many students, it's a quite attractive offer that they get the possibility to study and possibility to get the job afterwards. So that is, so to say, the present day huge project.
Thank you. Thank you. We have just 5 minutes left, so Andreas, I think we will not be able to receive more questions after your answer to the question, Andreas.
I would also nuance the Russian influence. The Russians are maybe popular, as we have heard, with the incumbents, with the autocrats, with the military, with those that fear the Arab Spring, but those secular trends that led to the Arab Spring are not gone. And we still have the youth bulge, we have educated people that don't find mobility. So all the reasons that originally led to the Arab Spring are still out there. And Russia is not offering any solution to these root causes of the regime crisis in the first place. With respect to the popularity, I mean, what comes to my mind is an old Soviet anecdote. Why do autocrats from Arab countries and Africa send their students, their kids, to the Felix Lumumba University in Moscow? Because they return as anti-communists. When you send them to Berkeley or to Cambridge and Oxford, they will return as leftist and as Marxist. So the disillusionment of about the achievements of the Soviet Union were tremendous among those foreign students in the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was a highly racist society. So I have been a couple of times at the Felix Lumumba University in the second half of the 1980s, and many of the students there experienced the everyday racism against especially students coming from African, but also from Arab or other Asian countries. So we should not somehow think that all those who have studied in the former Soviet Union returned as, pro-Russian thinkers, or that they were culturally closer than to Russia. China is, of course, offering investment. It comes with infrastructure. The Russians don't invest much. They have far less to offer. And in the longer term, I think Russia is rather the junior partner of China in Central Asia, but also maybe in the Middle East. So it's a highly asymmetric relationship. And all those who are interested in investment, we see that already in Central Asia. They don't look anymore to Moscow. The only reason to look to Moscow is energy dependence. But when it comes to investment and infrastructure, they look to Beijing.
Okay, so I mean it's already 7 p.m. We are supposed to stop here. Unfortunately, it's time to end the meeting. As a final note, I would like to underline the fact that the dynamics and conditions energizing the current state of affairs in the Middle East definitely require more close and careful tracking, as they can provide us with a perspective on the conditions that have been conducive to the shift of once marginal sets of social, cultural, political, and geographical margins to the political center, which is one of the main themes of the project. So, I mean, internal conditions have often been probed, but little attention has been paid to broader conditions emerging after 1989. So it's therefore, as far as I understand from all this discussion, it's a potent avenue to further research the historical origins and evolution of the pre-conflict social and political structures in the Middle East, with a particular focus on the influence of the Soviet or socialist order. So I would like to thank you all for being with us, and thank you for the interesting questions and comments. It was a stimulating discussion for me. I mean, I hope you also feel the same. Please join me in thanking our panelists one more time. Thank you so much for being with us, sharing your expertise, Andreas and Zahur. Thanks for enlightening us. And thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you all. Let's meet at the next seminar. We will be sharing the details for the next seminar later on, and you will be receiving emails from the SFM project. So I wish you all a good evening, and for Christian colleagues, wishing you a blessed and happy Easter. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.